seems somewhere on the floor of the Barents Sea. There is a warship lying upside down in the dark. It has been there since Boxing Day, 1943. Nearly 1,932 men went down with it. Only 36 came back up. For 57 years, nobody knew exactly where it was. And when Norway finally found it, in the year 2000, they did not send divers down. They did not send salvage teams. They looked at what the sonar was showing them, made a decision, and sealed the site off. Permanently. Why no one is allowed near the Scharnhorst is not a simple answer. But it is the right one. Let's go through it properly. In June 1935, workers at the Kriegsmarine Werft dockyard in Wilhelmshaven laid down the keel of a warship that was never supposed to exist. The Treaty of Versailles, signed after the First World War, had stripped Germany of its right to build a navy capable of threatening Europe. The terms were explicit. Germany could maintain a small coastal defense fleet, and nothing more. The Scharnhorst was Germany's answer to those restrictions. And it was not a small coastal vessel. When completed in January 1939, the ship displaced over 32,000 tons. It stretched 234 meters from bow to stern, carried 9 28-centimeter guns arranged in 3 massive triple turrets, and could push through open water at over 31 knots. Germany classified it as a battleship. Many Allied analysts called it a battle cruiser because of its lighter main armament compared to true battleships. The classification barely mattered. What mattered was what the Scharnhorst could do in open water, and that became clear very quickly. Together with its sister ship Gneisenau, the Scharnhorst sank the British armed merchant cruiser HMS Rawalpindi in November 1939. During the German invasion of Norway the following year, it engaged HMS Renown, lost its forward turret entirely, and kept going. In June 1940, the Scharnhorst and Gneisenau caught the British aircraft carrier HMS Glorious and its 2 escort destroyers. They sank all 3. During that engagement, the Scharnhorst scored one of the longest-range naval gunfire hits ever recorded. That was the kind of ship this was. In early 1942, the Scharnhorst pulled off one of the most audacious naval operations of the entire war, the Channel Dash. Alongside Gneisenau and the heavy cruiser Prince Eugen, it sailed directly through the English Channel, from occupied France to Germany, in broad daylight. The Royal Navy and the Royal Air Force tried to stop them, and failed. The Scharnhorst took a mine hit during the run. It made it through anyway. By early 1943, the ship had been transferred to northern Norway, stationed alongside the Tirpitz at Altafjord. Their mission was straightforward: threaten and destroy the Allied convoys running supplies from Britain and Iceland to the northern ports of the Soviet Union. Those convoys were a lifeline: food, fuel, weapons, ammunition, raw materials, keeping the Soviet war effort alive on the Eastern Front. For Germany, cutting that supply line was one of the few strategic options left. The threat was a serious one. Even the possibility that a capital ship like the Scharnhorst might sorties was enough to disrupt convoy operations. That had been proven the year before, when false reports that the Tirpitz had sailed to intercept convoy PQ-17 caused the entire convoy to scatter. German U-boats and aircraft picked the merchant ships apart, one by one. It was one of the worst Allied convoy disasters of the war. The lesson was brutal and clear. As long as those battleships sat in Norwegian fjords, the convoys were never safe. By December 1943, Germany's situation had become desperate. The army was in continuous retreat on the Eastern Front. The Luftwaffe had been ground down by 4 years of attrition. Allied anti-submarine capabilities were steadily neutralizing the U-boat threat. The Tirpitz had been crippled by a British submarine attack and was no longer combat-ready. That left the Scharnhorst as Germany's only operational capital ship in Norway, the only weapon left that could still strike at the convoys. On December 25, 1943, the Scharnhorst left Altafjord under the overall command of Rear Admiral Erik Bay. 5 destroyers of the 4th Destroyer Flotilla sailed alongside. Their target was convoy JW-55B, 19 merchant vessels making the dangerous run to the Soviet Union. Captain Fritz Hinze shared a message from Grand Admiral Donitz with the crew. the mission was clear: attack and destroy an enemy convoy carrying war materials to the Russians. The conditions were brutal. A southwesterly gale had developed. Snow piled on the gun decks and settled over the rangefinders. Ice choked the optical equipment. Massive waves broke over the bow, continuously. In those conditions, the Scharnhorst and its destroyer escort quickly became separated. In the heavy seas and darkness, Rear Admiral Bay, unable to locate the convoy, and running without air reconnaissance because the Luftwaffe's planes had been grounded by the storm, detached the destroyers to search southward. They never rejoined the fight. The Scharnhorst was now alone, and what Bay did not know was that the British had been waiting for him. Admiral Bruce Fraser, commander of the British Home Fleet, had specifically used convoy JW-55B as bait. Fraser's Force 2, built around the battleship HMS Duke of York, the cruiser HMS Jamaica, and 4 destroyers including the Norwegian ship HNOMS Stord, was approaching from the west. Vice Admiral Burnett's Force 1, consisting of HMS Belfast, HMS Norfolk, and HMS Sheffield, was already in position near the convoy. At 8:40 in the morning of December 26th, Boxing Day, the radar aboard HMS Belfast picked up a contact approaching from 35,000 yards. It was the Scharnhorst. Battle had begun. Burnett's cruisers closed in. HMS Norfolk scored a critical hit early in the engagement, knocking out the Scharnhorst's main fire control radar. That hit was devastating. Without that radar, the Scharnhorst was effectively half-blind in the Arctic darkness and driving snow. The German ship turned north, attempting to circle around the British cruisers and approach the convoy from a different angle. Burnett chose to stay between the Scharnhorst and the merchant ships, rather than give chase. It was the right call. The Scharnhorst made a second attempt to reach the convoy and ran straight into the cruisers again. All 3 British cruisers opened fire. The Scharnhorst was hit repeatedly. A shell punched through the aircraft hangar. Another opened a hole in the starboard hull and knocked out the ventilation system in B turret. One survivor later described how the turret filled with choking smoke every time the gun breeches were opened, and the combination of smoke and the violent motion of the ship in heavy seas left nearly every man inside violently seasick. The Scharnhorst turned south for Norway. This time, it was running. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a like if you want to see more stories about fascinating battleships. Up to this point, the Scharnhorst's crew believed they could outrun any pursuer. They had the speed. They had done it before. That confidence was about to be destroyed. Burnett's cruisers shadowed the fleeing battleship using their superior radar, keeping just close enough to maintain contact. HMS Sheffield and HMS Norfolk eventually dropped out of the chase, leaving HMS Belfast alone on the Scharnhorst's tail. If the German ship had turned and attacked Belfast at that point, it would have outgunned the cruiser completely. It didn't. The Scharnhorst kept running south, directly toward Admiral Fraser and the waiting guns of HMS Duke of York. At 4:50 in the afternoon, in total Arctic darkness, the Duke of York opened fire with its 14-inch guns at a range of 12,000 yards. Starshells lit up the sky and illuminated the Scharnhorst for the British gunners. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. The Duke of York's heavy shells hammered the German ship, disabling a boiler room and cutting the Scharnhorst's speed significantly. Without its speed advantage, the ship had nothing left. British destroyers closed in. HMS Savage and HNOMS Stord attacked from one side. HMS Scorpion and HMS Samares came in from the other. They launched torpedoes at close range, while the Scharnhorst's secondary guns fired back. Desperately, one torpedo struck the ship aft and flooded 3 compartments. The watertight doors had to be sealed. On the 25 men trapped inside, there was no other option. The shelling continued. A sailor aboard HMS Norfolk later described watching the bombardment. Once the Duke of York's guns started firing, the Scharnhorst was ablaze from one end to the other. The decks were littered with dead, the bodies washing overboard in the heavy seas. Through all of it, the Scharnhorst's guns kept firing, even as the ship burned and listed and took on water. The gun crews refused to stop. Captain Hintze addressed his crew through the ship's loudspeaker for the last time. He told them. He shook them all by the hand for the final time. At 7:45 in the evening, the Scharnhorst heeled over to starboard and sank by the bow. Survivors later reported that the propellers were still spinning as they rose out of the water. The ship went down under power, still fighting, the screws turning, until the sea swallowed it completely. British ships began searching the freezing water for survivors. A full Arctic gale, near freezing water temperatures, total darkness. Voices could be heard, calling for help. In the dark, the rescue effort was cut short. Of the 1,968 officers and men aboard the Scharnhorst, only 36 were pulled from the water alive. The Battle of the North Cape was the last engagement between British and German big-gun capital ships. It was also the second-to-last battleship engagement in history, followed only by the Battle of Surigao Strait in October 1944. With the Scharnhorst destroyed and the Tirpitz still crippled, Germany's surface naval threat in the Arctic and Atlantic was effectively over. Admiral Fraser, after the battle, addressed his crew with words that have stayed with the story ever since. He honored the German sailors and said he hoped that any of his officers ever called upon to lead a ship against a far superior force would fight as gallantly as the Scharnhorst had fought that day. For decades after the battle, the wreck's exact position remained unknown. The engagement had taken place in poor visibility, in a storm, in total darkness. Navigation fixes during the fight were rough. The British knew the approximate area, somewhere north-northeast of North Cape, but the Barents Sea is vast, deep, and hostile. Norwegian fishermen working those waters over the years occasionally reported snagged nets and damaged gear in certain areas. Something large was sitting on the bottom. No formal search was mounted. The technology to survey deep Arctic waters accurately simply did not exist yet. That changed. In September 2000, a joint expedition organized by the BBC, the Norwegian broadcaster NRK, and the Royal Norwegian Navy set out to find the Scharnhorst. The effort was led by Norwegian journalist and author Alf R. Jacobsen, who had spent years researching the ship's final battle. The expedition used the underwater survey vessel Sverdrup with sonar, scanning the seafloor systematically, looking for an object roughly 230 meters long, in waters nearly 290 meters deep. They found it. On September 10, 2000, a remotely operated vehicle descended to the wreck and confirmed its identity. The armament visible on the seafloor matched the Scharnhorst's configuration. After 57 years, the ship had been found. The condition of the wreck told the story of its final moments more clearly than any survivor account could. The Scharnhorst lay approximately 66 miles north-northeast of North Cape, at a depth of roughly 290 meters, completely inverted, upside down, on the seafloor. The bow section had been torn away from the main hull, most likely the result of a catastrophic magazine explosion as the ship went down. The stern section was also detached. Heavy debris was scattered across the surrounding seabed. Fishing nets and trawl lines were tangled across the wreckage, the physical evidence of every snagged net those fishermen had reported. For decades, Norway had seen enough. The decision to seal the wreck off was not complicated. Under the Norwegian Cultural Heritage Act of 1978, shipwrecks of historical and cultural significance receive automatic legal protection. The Scharnhorst qualified on every count. Beyond that, the wreck is recognized as a war grave under international maritime conventions. It is illegal to dive on it, to disturb the site, to remove artifacts from it, or to conduct any operations that would alter the wreck in any way. But here is what most people do not know. Legal designation alone is not enough. Norway had already learned that the hard way. In 2014, the Norwegian warship HNOMS Norge, sunk during the German invasion of Narvik in 1940, had its diving ban lifted to attract recreational divers to the area. Within months, artifacts began disappearing from the wreck. Items were being stolen from a site where Norwegian sailors had died, defending their country. Worse examples existed beyond Norway's borders. The wrecks of HMS Prince of Wales and HMS Repulse, two British capital ships sunk by Japanese aircraft in 1941, were formally designated as protected war graves by the British government. That designation did not stop illegal salvage operations from systematically stripping both wrecks for scrap metal. Entire sections of the ships were cut away and removed. The graves of hundreds of British sailors were ransacked for profit. Norway saw those cases and understood what protection actually required. Not just a law on paper, genuine physical inaccessibility and the will to enforce it. The Scharnhorst lies at 290 meters in Arctic waters, beyond the reach of recreational divers. The capsized orientation makes penetration of the hull essentially impossible, even for advanced, remotely operated vehicle operations. There is no practical reason to go down there. The ship has been identified. Its location is recorded. The story of its loss is thoroughly documented. What remains on that seafloor is not an archaeological site, it is a cemetery. Norway's relationship with German wartime wrecks along its coast is complicated, and not every wreck has received the same treatment. The German submarine U-864, sunk by HMS Venturer off Bergen in February 1945, sits at around 150 meters. It is also a war grave. It is also carrying approximately 65 tons of mercury in its cargo holds, making it a serious environmental hazard. Norway has been forced to weigh the sanctity of the grave against the risk of mercury contaminating surrounding waters. By any measure, an impossible choice. The Tirpitz, sister ship of the Bismarck, once the largest battleship in the German fleet, was sunk in a Norwegian fjord by RAF Lancaster bombers in November 1944. It was not preserved as a war grave. Norwegian salvage crews cut the ship apart for scrap throughout the 1950s. The decision was driven by practical realities. The massive ship had capsized and was lying half-beached in a populated fjord, an environmental hazard, and a navigational obstruction. The bodies of the crew were recovered and given proper burials before the scrapping began. War grave protections, as we understand them today, simply did not exist in the same form. In the 1950s, the German destroyers in Narvik Harbor are now breaking apart after more than 80 years underwater. As they deteriorate, the risk of major fuel leaks increases. The Blücher, a German heavy cruiser sunk in the Oslo Fjord during the 1940 invasion, required an emergency operation in 1994 to pump oil from its deteriorating hull before the fuel could contaminate the surrounding waters. These cases show the constant tension between preservation and practicality that Norway faces with dozens of wartime wrecks scattered along its coast and in its fjords. The Scharnhorst is different from all of them. It poses no environmental threat at its current depth. It is not obstructing navigation. It is not in a populated area. It is not breaking apart in a way that threatens nearby ecosystems. There is no compelling reason to disturb it. The only reason anyone would want to reach that wreck is curiosity, or worse, profit. Norway's position is that neither of those justifies opening a grave. Nearly 1,932 men are still inside that ship, sailors who were trapped in sealed compartments as the water rose, gun crews killed at their stations by British shells, engineers who were in the boiler rooms when the torpedoes hit, men who were still alive when the watertight doors were closed above them. The Arctic cold means that many of those remains may still be preserved in the darkness inside the hull. Norway treats the site the same way it would treat any cemetery. You do not dig up a graveyard because you are curious about what is inside. The Scharnhorst fought until the very end. Its gun crews kept firing while the ship burned around them. Its captain said goodbye over the ship's intercom, with a dignity that even the British commander acknowledged after the battle. When the ship finally went under, the propellers were still turning. The men who died on that ship did not surrender. They did not abandon their posts. They fought a losing battle against overwhelming odds in one of the most hostile environments on the planet, and they went down with the ship. Norway guards the wreck because someone has to. Because the alternative is what happened to the Prince of Wales and the Repulse. Because the alternative is what happened to the Norge in Narvik Harbor. Because a line drawn on a map means nothing if no one enforces it. The Scharnhorst sits in Norwegian waters, and Norway has decided that those 1,932 men will be left in peace. That decision is not up for debate.